I had been searching for an apartment for weeks, and finally, I found a quaint little townhouse tucked away on a quiet street, its brick facade framed by climbing ivy and flower boxes spilling over with vibrant blooms. The air smelled faintly of earth and flowers, and there was something comforting in the gentle creak of the old wooden door as I pushed it open. I wasn't sure what I expected when I met my new landlady, but the moment she appeared in the hallway, I realized my expectations might have been entirely off. She was tall, poised, and effortlessly graceful, a woman in her early 40s with an easy confidence that somehow made the room feel warmer. Her hair was dark with just a hint of silver at the temples, perfectly framing a face that was striking but not flashy, a face that carried both authority and quiet humor. She smiled at me as I fumbled with my keys, and it was the kind of smile that lingered in the chest, warm and slightly mischievous. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth, melodic, with just enough playfulness to suggest she enjoyed little mysteries. She extended her hand to help me with my bags. I noticed the subtle texture of her skin, soft, but with a firmness that spoke of years of living with purpose. Our hands met, and for a moment, I was acutely aware of the warmth that lingered after she released it. A small shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to focus on the practicalities, finding my apartment, settling in. As she led me up the narrow staircase, I couldn't help but notice how she moved, deliberate, composed, almost like she was orchestrating an invisible rhythm. Her presence commanded attention without demanding it, and yet there was a softness too, the occasional tilt of her head, the way her eyes crinkled slightly when she laughed at my nervous jokes. The hallway smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, the air tinged with lavender from a nearby sachet. I tried to mask my curiosity as I followed her, stealing glances at the subtle lines on her face, the elegance in her posture. There was a tension, an unspoken energy, in the way she occasionally let her hand brush against mine when pointing out small details in the apartment. Nothing overt, just fleeting moments that made my pulse quicken. When we reached my door, she handed me the keys with a playful glint in her eyes. "Take good care of it," she said softly, but her smile hinted at a layer of teasing beneath the surface. I nodded, trying to act casual, though I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. There was something magnetic about her, something that suggested this simple act of renting an apartment would be far from ordinary. As I stepped into my new home, I couldn't shake the memory of that first touch, that first glance, and the quiet warmth of her presence lingering behind me in the hallway. In that moment, I realized that moving into this apartment wasn't just about finding a place to live. It was stepping into a story I wasn't ready to fully understand, one that might just change the way I saw the world and her forever. A week had passed since I moved in, and the routine of unpacking and settling into my new space was beginning to feel comfortably mundane, until the day I met her in the small office of the townhouse to pay my first month's rent. She was leaning casually against the doorway, arms crossed, yet radiating that same effortless poise that had caught my attention the first time we met. Her eyes sparkled as she watched me approach, and the faint curve of her lips hinted that she already knew exactly what effect she had on me. "Your rent is due," she said, voice soft but laced with playful amusement, and for a moment, I thought it was just a standard statement. Then came the twist, the teasing inflection at the end. In kisses, I froze, blinking as though I'd misheard, a flush creeping over my cheeks. Her eyes danced with delight at my reaction, as if she had been waiting to see exactly how flustered I would become. I laughed nervously, brushing a hand through my hair, trying to act casual. Words failed me. She stepped closer, just enough that the subtle scent of her perfume reached me, a delicate mixture of vanilla and something floral, warm and inviting. As she handed me my receipt, her fingers brushed mine ever so lightly. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a small, electric thrill up my arm, and I realized my pulse was racing. I quickly looked away, pretending to check the details on the paper, but the warmth lingered like a gentle echo. There was something intoxicating in the way she carried herself, the small, deliberate gestures, the confidence in her posture, the way she let her gaze linger just an extra heartbeat longer than necessary. She seemed completely aware of the effect she had, and yet there was no overt provocation, no pressure, only the teasing suggestion of intimacy wrapped in light-hearted humor. I try to focus on the practical side of things, the rent, the apartment, the mundane act of being a responsible tenant, but every small gesture kept pulling my attention back. The soft light filtering through the office window highlighted the subtle warmth in her skin, the delicate curve of her smile, the way her hair fell lightly over one shoulder. Even the faint rustle of her blouse as she leaned forward made my heart skip a beat. Finally, she leaned back, her voice softening. "Don't take me too literally," she said with a teasing wink. And yet, there was a warmth beneath her words, a quiet invitation that lingered far longer than her brief touch. As I left the office, I caught myself replaying the moment, the light brush of her hand, the sparkle in her eyes, the gentle, mischievous rhythm of her teasing words. It was strange. I'd only known her a week, and yet I felt already ensnared by the quiet magnetism she radiated. The townhouse felt different now, charged with the unspoken tension of possibility. And for the first time since moving in, I realized that living here would not just be about rent or an apartment. It was about navigating the unexpected pull of someone far older, far more experienced, and entirely captivating. A few weeks had passed since my move in, and what had begun as routine interactions with my landlady had gradually grown into moments I found myself anticipating more than I cared to admit. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I offered to help her with some tasks around the building. Simple things like organizing old boxes in the storage room or carrying a bag of groceries upstairs. She accepted without hesitation, her eyes lighting up with subtle amusement, as though she enjoyed my company more than I had suspected. As we worked side by side, the space between us felt charged, though we didn't speak of it directly. Every small gesture seemed loaded with meaning. My hand brushed against hers when passing a box. Her fingers lingered an instant longer than necessary when showing me where to place a shelf. I could feel a warmth spreading through my chest each time our eyes met, and yet she never forced the moment. It was all gentle, teasing, electric in its restraint. We paused for a moment in the living room, surveying the small progress we'd made. She leaned slightly on the counter, her posture relaxed yet deliberate, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee she had poured for both of us. "You're surprisingly good at this," she said, her voice soft but carrying a playful undertone. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, caught off guard by the praise, but more so by the way her eyes seemed to linger on me, searching, assessing, teasing. There was a quiet intimacy in these shared moments, nothing overt, but everything felt loaded with meaning. She talked about small personal details, a favorite author, a memory from a recent trip, a story about the neighborhood from years ago. I listened, fascinated by the depth of her experiences and the way she articulated them with warmth and subtle humor. I shared bits of my own life too, moments of vulnerability I rarely revealed to anyone, and I noticed how she absorbed each word with gentle attentiveness, a slight nod here, a soft smile there, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. Even the smallest interactions were rich with unspoken connection. When she handed me a tool, our fingers brushed, and I felt a jolt of awareness, my heart skipping a beat. When she laughed at one of my clumsy jokes, it was not just amusement. It was a sound that seemed to linger in the room, wrapping around me and leaving me slightly dizzy with warmth. By the time we had finished, the afternoon sun had shifted, casting a golden glow through the windows. I realized, almost with a start, that my thoughts were no longer on the task at hand, but on her. The curve of her smile, the quiet confidence in her movements, the way her presence made the space feel brighter, warmer, more alive. It was in these ordinary moments, organizing, laughing, sharing small glimpses of our lives, that I began to understand the depth of the pull between us. She was more than just my landlady. She was someone whose presence made the mundane feel intimate, whose touch lingered longer than necessary, whose attention made me feel inexplicably important. And in that quiet afternoon light, I found myself silently hoping these shared moments would never end. By now, the rhythm of our days had settled into a comfortable, almost domestic pattern. I would pass by her office or the kitchen, and we'd exchange small smiles, brief touches of hands when passing items, or lingering glances that seemed to stretch just a heartbeat too long. Yet, beneath the warmth of familiarity, a quiet tension had begun to gnaw at me, a tangle of excitement, hesitation, and self-doubt. I found myself questioning everything about my feelings. Was it really appropriate to be drawn to her in this way? She was older, confident, experienced, while I was just starting to find my footing in the adult world. And yet, the pull was undeniable. Every casual brush of her fingers, every playful look that lingered a moment longer than necessary, sent a thrill coursing through me, leaving me restless in ways I couldn't fully name. One evening, I stayed behind in the small courtyard to water the plants, pretending to focus on the delicate blooms while she lingered nearby, sipping tea from a porcelain cup. I could hear the soft scrape of her chair as she adjusted her seat, the faint hum of the heater in the background, and the rhythmic clink of the cup against its saucer. Her presence was enveloping, grounding, yet somehow destabilizing at the same time. She noticed my hesitance, I realized. Her eyes met mine, warm and teasing, yet probing, as though she could sense the internal tug-of-war within me. "You seem quiet today," she said softly, her voice a gentle melody. I fumbled for words, unsure how to articulate the storm of feelings I had been trying to keep contained. She leaned back slightly, giving me space, yet the subtle warmth of her nearness made my chest tighten with a mix of longing and restraint. We shared a quiet meal on that same evening. Nothing extravagant, just simple food, laughter, and conversation, but every interaction was magnified in my awareness. When our hands brushed across the table, I felt a shiver of electricity, quickly masked by a nervous cough. When she laughed at my awkward attempt at a joke, it felt like the sound was wrapping around me, a soft tether pulling me closer, yet reminding me of the boundaries I wasn't ready to cross. Her teasing was still present, light and playful, yet it now carried a new weight, one that made me question whether she was aware of the effects she had on me, or if I was projecting my own desires onto her. I noticed the faint brush of her hair against my shoulder when she reached for something, the softness of her fingers grazing mine as she handed me a napkin, the subtle tilt of her head as she studied me with quiet amusement. Each gesture was small, innocent in isolation, but together they became a language I couldn't fully decipher. By the time the evening ended, I was left with a mix of exhilaration and guilt, desire and doubt. I wanted to lean in closer, to let the moment stretch into something more tangible. Yet a part of me held back, conscious of the age gap, the social expectations, and the uncertainty of her intentions. The emotional tug-of-war had begun in earnest, and I realized that our connection, though intoxicating, would demand patience, observation, and courage, a slow burn that neither of us could rush, but that promised, in its subtlety, the deepest kind of intimacy. It was an ordinary afternoon that suddenly felt anything but ordinary. I had gone to her office to deliver a stack of mail, and she was sitting behind her desk, sorting through papers, her hair loosely pinned back with a few strands escaping to frame her face. The sunlight fell in gentle slants through the blinds, casting stripes of gold and shadow across the room, illuminating the quiet elegance of her presence. I cleared my throat, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and anticipation. As I handed her the envelope, our fingers brushed, lightly, accidentally, or so I told myself. But the brush was electric, a spark that traveled up my arm, making my heart lurch and my pulse quicken. She looked up from the papers, her eyes catching mine with a depth that made me forget to breathe for a moment. There was no teasing this time, no playful glint. Only a warm, unspoken acknowledgement, as if she had sensed the feelings I had been trying to keep hidden. I started, unsure what I was even trying to say. Words felt clumsy, inadequate. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze patient and calm, giving me space to gather myself. I realized that everything I'd felt in these past weeks, the nervous excitement, the restless curiosity, the quiet longing, was concentrated in this single moment. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle weight of understanding. And yet, even as she spoke, there was an unmistakable intimacy in the way her eyes searched mine, holding mine in quiet expectation. I felt seen completely and without pretense, and that realization made my chest tighten with a mixture of exhilaration and vulnerability. We stood in silence for a heartbeat that stretched impossibly long. Then, in a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, she leaned slightly closer, as if closing a tiny fraction of the distance between us. Her hair brushed the edge of my shoulder, and the warmth of her presence enveloped me like a soft, insistent tide. I could feel the quiet rhythm of her breath, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, and the soft warmth of her hand as it rested briefly on the edge of the desk. I swallowed hard, feeling the tension of anticipation mingling with a deep, unspoken desire. "I enjoy spending time with you," I managed to say, my voice quieter than I intended, almost a whisper. She smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that sent warmth through my entire body. "I know," she replied, her tone teasing yet tender, as if she had been waiting for me to admit it all along. The room seemed to shrink around us, the ordinary sounds of the building fading into the background. That quiet acknowledgement, a brush of fingers, a lingering gaze, a soft confession, transformed the space between us. We were no longer simply landlady and tenant. We were two people suspended in a delicate, intimate orbit, aware of the pull between us, yet restrained by patience and understanding. For the first time, I felt the full weight of our attraction, palpable, undeniable, and entirely mutual. And though nothing overt had yet transpired, I knew that the slow burn we had been nurturing was on the brink of something far deeper, something neither of us could fully name, yet both of us wanted. That evening, the rain had been falling steadily, a soft rhythm tapping against the windows of the townhouse. I had come by to return a book I'd borrowed from her collection, but the sound of the rain made everything feel more intimate, more suspended in time. She was sitting on the small couch in the living room, a blanket draped lightly over her shoulders, a cup of steaming tea in her hands. The soft glow of the lamp cast a warm halo around her, highlighting the curve of her smile and the gentle lines of her face. I hesitated at the doorway, feeling the familiar stir of nervous anticipation in my chest. She looked up, and her eyes sparkled with that same quiet amusement and understanding she always carried. "Come in," she said softly, patting the space beside her. I crossed the room, each step deliberate, aware of the small thrill that came from being so close. Sitting next to her, I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her side, comforting and yet electric in a way that made my pulse quicken. We talked quietly about trivial things at first, the weather, the rain, the books we had been reading, but the conversation was merely a backdrop for the tension that lingered in the space between us. Occasionally, our knees brushed, sending small jolts of awareness through me. She reached over to adjust the blanket, and her fingers grazed my arm, a feather-light touch that left a warm, lingering tingle. I tried not to overthink it, yet I couldn't ignore the slow, steady pull of desire beneath the surface, subtle but insistent. At one point, she leaned closer to reach for the tea, and our shoulders pressed together. I felt the heat of her body, the gentle rise and fall of her breath, and the faint scent of her perfume, vanilla with a hint of jasmine, filling the small space between us. Her presence was enveloping, yet safe, a delicate balance of intimacy and restraint. My own hand shifted slightly, brushing against hers as if accidentally, yet the touch seemed to linger in the air long after. Then came the playful tease that had become our ritual. She glanced at me, eyes sparkling, and said, with just a hint of a smile, "Remember, your rent." I felt my lips twitch into a nervous smile, heart thumping, and before I realized it, I leaned in, gently pressing a light, deliberate kiss to her cheek. Her reaction was soft and warm. She tilted her head slightly, brushing her hair behind her ear and letting the moment stretch just long enough to make my chest tighten with quiet exhilaration. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us aware of the new layer in our connection, the subtle, physical acknowledgement of our mutual feelings. The rain continued its steady rhythm, a soft, calming soundtrack to the intimacy we shared. Every small touch, every glance, every gentle brush of our hands felt like an unspoken conversation, conveying trust, attraction, and a tenderness neither of us had dared to voice aloud before. As I finally stood to leave, she reached out, lightly brushing my hand with hers. The contact was brief but potent, leaving me warmed from within, my mind replaying the moment long after I stepped into the hallway. I realized then that our slow-burn connection had deepened into something far more tangible, a delicate intimacy built on trust, subtle affection, and the anticipation of what might come next. Weeks had passed since that rainy evening, and something in the townhouse had shifted. The quiet tension, the teasing glances, the subtle touches that had once left me anxious and breathless now felt like part of the rhythm of our lives. What had started as playful attraction had deepened into a gentle, steady intimacy, woven into ordinary moments, morning coffees, casual conversations, and shared laughter echoing through the hallways. That morning, the sun poured through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow across the small table where I sat, nursing a cup of coffee. She appeared in the doorway, holding her own mug, the soft smile that had become so familiar warming my chest instantly. There was a relaxed ease in her movement, a quiet confidence, and yet her eyes carried that same sparkle, a playful glint that reminded me of the first time she had teased me about my rent. "Good morning," she said softly, setting her mug down beside mine. The space between us was close but comfortable, and for a moment, we simply sat together, the quiet hum of the morning filling the kitchen. I realized how natural it had become to be near her, how easy it was to share silence without discomfort, how every brush of her hand, every tilt of her head, now felt like home. Then came the familiar teasing, as if no time had passed at all. "Don't forget," she said, her voice light, almost musical, "your rent." I felt a smile tug at my lips, my heart skipping a beat despite knowing exactly what she meant. Without hesitation, I leaned forward, pressing a gentle, deliberate kiss to her cheek. The warmth of her skin, the soft curve of her lips under mine, and the faint scent of her perfume combined to create a moment suspended in time. She tilted her head slightly, returning the gesture with a soft, approving smile. We lingered there, the small act of affection speaking volumes about trust, patience, and the quiet joy of shared connection. There was no rush, no urgency, only the comforting knowledge that we had arrived at a place of mutual understanding, of tenderness built slowly, carefully, with attention to the subtleties that mattered most. Over the next few hours, the townhouse buzzed with ordinary life, the clink of dishes, the soft rustle of papers, the hum of conversation. Yet every movement, every glance, every casual touch was imbued with the intimacy we had nurtured. We moved through our days like this, seamlessly blending companionship, playful teasing, and gentle affection. The slow-burn romance had blossomed into something fully realized, a connection rooted in emotional depth, respect, and mutual desire. As evening fell, we sat together on the small couch once more, her hand brushing against mine, her head resting lightly near my shoulder. The world outside faded into the gentle hush of twilight, and I realized that in the span of weeks, a simple rental arrangement had transformed into something far richer, a home not just of walls and furniture, but of trust, warmth, and a love that had grown slowly, sweetly, and undeniably between us. In that moment, I understood that our story didn't need grand gestures or declarations. It existed in the lingering touches, the shared laughter, the quiet acknowledgement of what had quietly, irrevocably grown between us. And for the first time, I felt completely, profoundly at home. Not just in the apartment, but in her presence, where my heart had found its place.